Israel's military says it recently found this security camera video in southern Gaza, apparently showing the Bibas family the same day they were kidnapped, October 7th, being moved by the militants. Baby Kafir was 9 months old at the time, the youngest hostage. Taken with his 4-year-old brother Ariel and their parents Shiri and Yarden. In November, as Hamas released over 100 hostages, the group claimed Shiri and her 2 children had been killed in an airstrike, but the militants haven't handed over any bodies.
I say, give them what they want. Just bring me back my family.
Yufat Zyla is a cousin of Shiri Bibas and her 2 boys. We spoke to her before the new video was made public.
For me, my family is still there, still very much alive until, we receive the confirmation.
Greetings, one and all. Super Tuesdays here in the Holy Land, in the Holy City, Elon Moreh Shechem, right next to my holy yeshiva. We are on the 3rd day of the month of Nisan, 5785. Reminding all of us that all these classes are for the sake of heaven, to remove the divine presence from the exile, to move ourselves, to improve ourselves, even one little step today, one little step equals a gigantic step of yesteryear. And as always, gratitude to our holy channel, Mike, and his volunteers and all their great work that they do, searching for missing individuals all over Israel, thousands every single year, and training dogs to protect Jewish settlements all over the land of Israel from Arab terrorist infiltration, and to the great blog, palmtreeofdeborah.com. Check it out, whether you have time or you don't, well worth your time. Okay, so we are on part 2 of weaponizing the hostages. Today we start with the subject of negotiating with terrorists. In the 1970s, Israel was applauded worldwide for their bold stand against negotiating with terrorists. In the amazing words of the former Prime Minister of Israel, Naftali Bennett, those that negotiate with terrorists receive terror. Simple. So we don't negotiate with terrorists, we eliminate them. Let's look with awe and envy at the old time Jew of Israel. In chronological order, May 8th, 1972, the Sabina airline in Israel, the Ben Gurion airport, hijacked by 4 members of the Black September organization. 90 passengers were aboard that plane. The terrorists demanded the release of 350 terrorists in Israeli prisons. 315, that's like it's like a gift today. That's like you won the lottery. The amount, we're talking about thousands today that are being released. Israel raided the plane. All were saved, all 90 except for 1. In the exchange of gunfire, 1 passenger was killed. Munich, September 1972. Israel, famous Olympic Games, where the Israeli athletes, the Jewish athletes, are kidnapped when they returned to their hotel rooms. Israel once again refused to negotiate with the terrorists, also from the Black September group. They were demanding 234 prisoners to be released, the overwhelming majority from Israel. Israel refused and tried unsuccessfully to free the hostages. 11 Jews were killed. How many Jews were saved by this policy of no negotiations with terrorists? 252 dangerous prisoners released if they would have agreed. We will see soon the results of these terrorist prisoners being released. So hold on tight. And of course, July 4th, 1976, Entebbe in Uganda. Terrorists demanded the release of 53 prisoners. 4 hostages were killed and 106 were saved. As promised, a frightening look, up close and personal, at the results of capitulation over the decades to terrorists, hostage deals. Take it away. May 1985. 1,150 terrorists released for 3 soldiers. This was called the Jabril deal. This was the catalyst of the deadly first uprising, what they call Intifada. 2 years later, in December 1987, 84 Jews in the first Intifada uprising. 3 soldiers kept alive, released, 84 dead Jews. Sit on that for a while. Continuing on this Jabril deal, May 1985. According to the head of Israel's Internal Security Service, Yuval Diskin, he stated clearly, the release of Arab prisoners was the main catalyst of creating the first uprising, the Intifada. The released prisoners built new leadership with its extreme activities. This, along with the fact that the Arabs succeeded in forcing Israel to capitulate via the release of terrorist prisoners. So you have a two-edged sword. The released terrorists built up new leadership to take over, and also this gave a new life, a new push for the Arabs who saw in plain sight how terrorism pays. Taking hostages pays. You'll be released. You could perform horrendous crimes against the Jewish people, but don't worry about it. You'll soon be released. To make things worse, one of those released, the 1150 Arab terrorist prisoners, was none other than a man named Ahmad Yassin. May his memory be erased. Yes, you might recognize this little known man. Tongue in cheek. Yes. This Ahmad Yassin founded an organization called Hamas, who on October 7th, on Simchat Torah, a year and a half ago, murdered 1,400 Jews. That's in one day. But all the years that we've suffered, all the Jews that have been maimed, injured, note, Yitzchak Navon, former president of Israel, at the time of this deal, the Jibril deal in May 1985, this was before, of course, he was president, responded. He was the only minister in the government to vote against the deal. We have shown the world that the best deal in town is to kidnap Jews, then in exchange, free hundreds of terrorists. We need to express to the families and the forms of hostages, this is a red line not to be crossed. Amazing how Mr. Navon means wise, how he was so wise to see the handwriting on the wall. What a disaster this began, with no end in sight, God forbid. Moving right along. In 2011, Gilad Shalit, a soldier, was exchanged for 1,027 prisoners. The prisoners released in 2011 proved to be the leadership that brought upon the Simchat Torah massacre, the October 7th massacre. 1,400 Jews murdered, annihilated in one day. One of those released, not so well known, maybe you heard it, maybe you didn't. Yehye Sinwar, may his name be erased. Folks, the axes of evil do not appear the next day. If a hostage was released and the next minute, the next day, you received attacks in Israel, it would be clear for everyone to see, because we all know that the Jewish memory does not go back too far, but a day or so, a week or so, the Jewish memory could go back and they would connect the puzzle. Listen to the year. The Shalit deal, where he was released, took place in 2011. The attack that we suffered a year and a half ago was in 2023. 12 years of rebuilding. That is the point. That is what We don't see that what a certain segment of the public is blinded to understanding, to seeing that. If it's not happening now, it doesn't exist. It's not a problem. We only see the smiles of the hostages released and their families and the crying and the celebration. We don't see the funerals of the thousands of Jews to come. God forbid. After a few hostage releases, pressure from within the government, pressure from the public, a commission was set up in the year 2008. Remember, 2008, 3 years before Gilad Shalit, was released for 1,027 prisoners. The commission called the Shamgar Commission. He was the head of justice. He was given jurisdiction to set up guidelines for negotiations with terrorists. Though the commission finished its work way before the Shalit exchange, the conclusions, the public conclusions of the Shamgar Committee was only allowed to be released in 2012. But once again, it was finished way before, and people on the inside, people in the government, people in the security services, in the GSS, General Secret Security, all knew about it. And even so, they just trampled on the conclusions. Listen to the conclusions of, some of the conclusions of the Shamgar Committee. In 2008, no swap, number one, no swap of large amount of prisoners. Yeah. No swap of large amount of prisoners. Number two, this is even greater. No contact between government officials and families or forums for the hostages, thus not allowing emotional pressure to be placed upon government officials. This is so basic. This is 101. Remember everything that we mentioned, all the pressure, and what's been happening the last 16 months in Israel with the forum and some of the missing families. No contact, I'm going to say it again, no contact between government officials and families or forums for the hostages, thus not allowing emotional pressure to be placed upon the government. In such predicament, we do not need emotional responses. We need a government to take the reins and give us, according to our wisdom, understanding, into the facts, into the figures, the statistics. We just quoted them. This is not rocket science. This is clear for anyone to see the results, tragic results of allowing a minority, a handful of people to go at the expense of hundreds of thousands of people. Needless to say, all these conclusions by the Shamgar Committee have been trampled upon with Shalit and now presently also. Okay. Put on a seatbelt. This is the conclusion. It's so important because many people, many rabbis have talked, but they have not clarified the issue here, the Jewish, the Torah aspect issue. Without promising, I will, in the comment section, bring a link, a couple of links to previous classes that I had, more on the Jewish law side of the hostages. Check it out, well worth your time. But I'm really going to summarize here, and it's very important to understand truth. Okay. It is brought down by Maimonides in the Laws of Giving to the Poor, chapter 8, law 10. Also brought down by the Tur, also a Jewish law book, in Yoredea, Code of Jewish Law, 252, paragraph 1. Also, of course, by the Code of Jewish Law himself, in Yoredea, Rabbi Yosef Karo, 252.1. There is no greater commandment than redeeming hostages. That is what is written in all the books that I just mentioned. According to the Talmud, in Tractate Bava Batra 8b, it says a great mitzvah. It doesn't say the greatest, but the commentators I mentioned use the language the greatest. Let's get one thing straight. There is a statement in the Talmud, in Tractate Megillah, page 16, side A. It says that the study of Torah is greater than saving lives. Now, does anyone believe, does anyone think that the law here is telling us that if I see somebody drowning, and I know how to swim, but I'm learning Torah at the time, and I hear somebody yelling, "Save me!" Does anyone believe that this Talmud passage is teaching us the law, a law that keep on learning and ignore the cry for help? That's absurd. No one would ever think of that. That's not the law. The law is you close that book and you go and try your best to save a person who's drowning, or a million and one other scenarios of people in danger. So we always have to know the context. The language, there is no greater commandment than redeeming hostages. Does that mean that when the terrorists demand the giving away of Herzliya to the Arabs for in exchange of a hostage, 10 hostages, 100 hostages, 1,000 hostages? Well, it says there's no greater mitzvah. So let us bring the terrorists to Herzliya. Are we going to hand over Tel Aviv? Maybe Jerusalem? Maybe the Western Wall? Maybe we'll leave the land of Israel. We'll just close the lights in the country. We'll all go to the Ben Gurion airport in Israel and we'll leave in order to save hostages, because it is the greatest commandment. It's absurd. It's unthinkable. It's not what it means. It's not what it means. So let's make it very, very clear. When the Torah speaks about the importance of redeeming hostages, we're talking about a monetary matter. And even on a monetary manner of ransom for the hostage, this too has its limits. We are told that one is not allowed to pay ransom more than the, let's call it the going rate. This was a time where there were people as a business would go out and kidnap people and use them as slaves or for ransom, for money. This too was minimalized, how much a Jew could put out monetarily to free another Jew. The Torah, all of the laws, all of the Talmud, never spoke about our situation in the last 50 plus years, where this is not a monetary issue. Do I pay ransom more than is accustomed, and this will whet the appetite of the kidnappers to perhaps kidnap more Jews, and maybe we'll run out of money, or maybe this will whet their appetite to kidnap more people. That was the issue. We were never talking about stopping a war against Islamic Nazis whose charter calls for the destruction of the Jewish people. Those that come to slay you, get up early in the morning and slay them first. It's not talking about that. We're not talking about letting go terrorists. That wasn't the scenario at all. Even when there was an exception to the rule, discussion, where there was a danger to a hostage or a kidnapped person's life, there, for example, there's a dispute amongst the sages. Is one allowed to spend more than what is accepted for the ransom and freedom of that hostage when there's a danger to the hostage's life? This is an exception to the rule. This is no longer, it's monetary, but the crux of the issue is there's an additional point here of a danger to the hostage's life, to the hostage life. And even here, according to the Tosfot in the tractate of Gittin, on page 45, side A, the Tosfot says, yes, you are allowed to give more than what's accepted, what's accustomed in the world as ransom, because there's an added factor of a danger to a person's life. The Ramban, Nachmanides, comes right on that same page of the Talmud, Gittin 45a, and says, no, even in such a predicament, you're not allowed to, because it will endanger more Jews. But folks, we were never talking about, even in this exception to the rule, where there was a danger to the hostage life, we were not talking about stopping a war against Islamo-Nazis who are doing jihad against the Jewish people. There's no difference between the PLO charter or the Hamas charter. They both say the same thing, the annihilation of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. We're not talking about stopping a war. They're not talking about in the Talmud and about a nation. This was a situation where Jews were in the exile. Jews were communities, small little communities. We're not talking about a nation. being threatened, stop the war effort, to annihilate, that it will not happen again, and we will not have hostages again, and we will not have dead Jews again, because we let go terrorists. Sometimes you got to pay a very difficult price of hostages that are alive, but you're looking at the bigger picture, much bigger picture. We're not talking about, the Torah was never talking about allowing terrorists to go free and come back to into the streets and to bring on another October 7th, God forbid, to reorganize. We see, just last week, more missiles coming in from Gaza. How did that happen? It has not happened since the war began. It happened because we're allowing them. We've allowed them to regroup. Unfortunately, this is not the only group. The Forum of the Missing Families, of the hostages, that are endangering the Jewish nation in Israel or worldwide. But there's also another group. We know as a fact that one of the catalysts for the Hamas attack a year and a half ago was the fact all these demonstrations that were taking place against the judicial reform, against the government. This is a fact. And today, in the last couple of days, in the last week or so, we see again these groups of people once again. Those that fail to learn from history are bound to repeat history. There's a great slogan that's, I think it's said in the name of Einstein, though I don't think he really said it. Another person said it. But what is a person who is an idiot? What's an idiot? Is a person that does the same thing over and over again and expects this time a different result. We have all the statistics. We can go on. How many of the terrorists returned to terror activities? How many new members were recruited through them? Amazing numbers. We could go through all the numbers. We have all the hostages released. We have all the numbers we gave in May 1985, what happened. In 2011 with Shalit. We have all the facts and all the information. And here, once again, we have another group here that are endangering the people of Israel with their demonstrations. The Hamas are having a field day. They're licking their fingers. We have groups, unfortunately, in Israel that pose a more serious threat to the Jewish physical body than Hamas. More of a threat. They could do more damage than Hamas can do. And I'm not talking, there's also much spiritual damage that they are doing within the Jewish people. That's for a different class. But this information is so important. Please share it with others. Get the message out, because people are afraid. People are afraid to stand up against these organizations, against this forums, whoever, and the message must be heard, because they are endangering the physical body of the people of Israel. May we see the final redemption today.